Good day, everybody. I want to talk a little bit about the performance management process. This is fundamental to what we're studying, and it's a fundamental precept of human resources. Some would say the same for management. Management is in charge of overseeing employees. Let's start with what's an employee and what are the expectations of an employee. If we're going to manage their performance, we have to understand what an employee is. So employee is hired. One of the principal role of an employee is to accomplish some task. And so when you have a global task, a broad task of an organization, that task has to be determined in terms of who's going to perform it and in what manner. So you take an objective, a strategy, and then you say it's going to take 3 or 4 or 5 people in order to accomplish that task, and they're going to have to perform these functions. And if they perform these functions in a satisfactory or meets expectations manner, then the organization as a whole will meet its objective. That's why we have employees, because by virtue of the tasks that they complete, then we as a supervisor are deemed successful, and we as an organization are meeting our objectives. So, it is the senior manager, our executives, that determine the objectives of an organization, and it is the line level, our first level supervisors, that determine how they're going to parcel out the jobs in order for each employee to accomplish that objective. They often create what's called a job description, and a job description details the specific duties that a person is intended to accomplish. Those duties often start with essential functions, other functions. Essential duties is the same concept. And then they talk about what type of background do you need in order to accomplish those tasks. So if you have an essential function of balancing a ledger, then you're going to have a series of knowledges, skills, and abilities that are going to allow a person in that job to be able to balance those ledgers. There's also some educations and experience that are included in that mix. And then we also include working conditions, working from home, working from the office, have to lift certain pounds, have to be able to walk in the course of your duties. And the cumulative nature of all of those aspects is what's called a job description. Then we go out and recruit an individual who can perform this job description. And the person whose background best meets what we're looking for this job description, that's the person that gets hired. And hopefully, as a result of hiring that person, what we've seen in their resume, what we've heard in their interview allows us to say, yes, that is a person that is going to accomplish the job. There's a saying that says you don't know what you bought until you start to use it, which means that it may look good on paper, it may sound good in an interview, but until they actually do the work, you really can't test the worth or the value of a person. Another example would be they walk the walk or they talk the talk, but can they walk the walk? So you want somebody who can talk a good game, but then also can walk a good game too. So all that background leads us to the person, our persons, that we hire to accomplish a series of tasks that cumulatively is going to allow us as a department or division, ultimately as an organization, to meet our overall objectives. So we start with that employee, and then we put them through what is often called a performance management process. The slide in front of you is quite typical of a performance management process. The term process means that there's a series of steps. This one indicates there's 5. And there's certain subsets in each one, but there's basically 5 steps that we have to go through in order to perform the performance management process. Process is a term that we often don't use much anymore. It indicates something that's bureaucratic, cumbersome, requires quite a bit of time, and may not give us the flexibility that we need as we go through this process to be able to train and retrain and then to evaluate, reevaluate, and then to try to obtain the type of performance we need. Some people will do what they call the seat of your pants, which I'm going to hire somebody and I'll just talk to them one-on-one and I'll teach them what they need in order to do their job well. That often doesn't work as well. It's also limited by the time that a supervisor has, because you have to spend so much individual time with the person. But if you have a process, and even if that process includes aspects like videos, as what we're doing today, where somebody can view that video and learn about the process, or if you're hiring 10 or 12 people or 15 people who are all going to be an engineer and all going to be working on a new highway, rather than spending an individual 10, 15, an hour with each person, you can have them watch a video or do a class and train them in the exact same manner. So processes are not to be dismissed. There's great value that can come with processes if they're created in the right manner and they're not cumbersome and bureaucratic. So whenever we create a process, especially as we go through school, we want to make sure that the process that we create is conducive for the outcome, that it doesn't interfere with the outcome, but is a guide that others could use that allow them to achieve their objective. The performance management process that you see here is actually quite good. There's some variations that I'm going to showcase with you here, but the hope is not that you follow this specific process. That may not be advantageous, because the process may work well for a post office, but may not work well for a restaurant. Or 80% of it would work if you worked at Google, but not if you worked at a hospital. So you have to tailor whatever process you have to the environment in which you work, to the employees in which you hire. And so given that background, I'm going to give you kind of an overview, a schematic of the performance management process. I'm going to use some terms that I would use in place of what you see in front of you, but what you see in front of you on the screen is really a guide. It's a guide that allows us, it provides us some foundation or basis upon which to extrapolate that which we want to use, but then going from there to really modify that approach based on the environment in which we find ourselves. So the first aspect that we talked about with the performance management process, I alluded to a couple minutes ago, and that is having a sense of what your organization's objective is. Here they call it strategic planning. And I've talked about strategic planning quite often. Strategic planning is a 3-step process in essence. It talks about where have you been, where do you want to go, and the strategic plan itself is that plan that's going to allow you to achieve your objectives given what your talents are. It's the how to achieve whatever your vision is, or wherever you want to go in a couple years. So if you want to learn to play the violin in the Philharmonic, and that is your ultimate objective, your strategic plan is the specific strategies that you're going to have to take in order to prepare yourself to be a violinist at a Philharmonic. So the first step of any performance management process is to, I call it, know where you're going. You can call it strategic planning, work analysis, job analysis, all these terms that sound better than where you're going to go. But in reality, the first step of the management process is, well, where do you want to go? Because you're going to, based on where you're going to go, that's going to tell you the type of employee you need to look for and the type of management oversight that you need to provide. You would be surprised how many organizations either don't have a clear sense of where they want to go, or they hire employees that really have no idea how their component, their part that they play in the organization is going to allow the organization to achieve its ultimate objectives. In fact, when I do consulting, I often go into an organization and I pick employees at random, especially if it's a large organization, and I'll bring them to a speech or a hall or a room that we're discussing some of these aspects. And I'll just ask them, can anybody tell me what the mission of an organization is? Can anybody tell me what the vision of the organization is? You would be quite surprised how many absolutely do not know what the mission and vision of their organization is. I would bet, although I'm not a betting person, I would bet that if you were to ask 10 of your coworkers what the mission of their organization is, 9 would not know. I almost would say 10, but 9 would not know. I bet that the person who created the mission statement for your organization probably couldn't remember that mission statement in a year. And the reason is because most organizations that I'm familiar with, that I have done work with, do not tie the mission and vision of their organization into the organization. They do not thread that mission and vision through every aspect of the organization's future. And a good example, since we're talking about performance management, is hardly any, very, very few evaluation tools that I'm aware of actually assess an employee in relation to how they are contributing to the organization achieving its mission. If organizations can't remember their mission, if employees can't remember their mission, then the performance management process is going to be severely limited in achieving its objectives, because you're not going to tie performance to overall objectives. But if we know where we want to go, which is the basis, which again is mission, vision, strategic plan, whatever foresight that you have as an organization, hopefully it's written. If you know where you want to go, then you have to do the second step, which is, who can we hire to get us there? It's very similar to how can we get there, but remember that this is a performance management process that's directed and dedicated to hiring the employees that are going to, over the long term, short term as well, but over the long term, allow an organization to achieve its objectives. So if we know where we want to go, then the second part has to be related to an employee. So we say, who is going to help us get there? As an organization that hires managers, we should hire a manager that knows something about what their department or division is going to do. That's certainly critical. If you're going to manage a host of financial analysts, you certainly have to know finance, and you have to know analytical work. Analytical work means to break apart. So those are two aspects that you're going to have detailed knowledge about. And then from there, now that we've hired that manager, and cognizant of the need to whom we're going to hire to get us there, that manager has to be able to go out and create the type of recruitment materials that are going to be attractive for somebody who wants to be a financial analyst at that company. They're certainly going to have to know how to interview the right person, to do a background investigation to determine the type of skills that they should have in their background. And so that's a key part of the overall performance management process. Where are we going to go, and who is going to help us get there? And then you're going to have to, as a manager, determine the number of employees that you need. And they often use this expression, rocket science, meaning it's very difficult. When people usually say it's not rocket science, which means it's not that difficult to determine. Determine how many employees is not rocket science, but there's really no formulaic approach that you can use. So my suggestion, my guide, is always to start small. Start small, which means if you don't know how many people to hire fewer. You can always add. In today's world, we don't hire as many full-time employees. In fact, upwards of 90% of people hired are some type of contract type employee, contract consultant. Either a limited term, or it's part-time, or some type of remote work that isn't full-time. The key word that I would use is permanence, in that there's nothing that says, or there's fewer jobs that say you're going to have this job for a number of years. Once you pass probation, you're going to be a permanent type of employee. Instead, we use more time frames. It's consultant work for X number of months. You're going to be a contract employee for the next 2 years until this project is done. Many more jobs are hired that way than a traditional, you have a full-time job and you'll have it as long as you would like it. Part of that is born into the statistics that the median time period an employee is in a job is about 4 years. And then the average number of years a business is in operation is 10. So given that employees don't stay at jobs very often, given that organizations don't stay in business very often, or for a long time frame, then you can see that the ability to hire a full-time employee in a quasi-permanent basis doesn't exist to the extent that it did 30 years ago or 50 years ago. As an example, if you were to talk to certainly your grandparents, I bet many of them had worked at the same company for 20 or 30 years. Both my parents worked at the same company for over 30 years. Now, the average person in the workplace today is going to have 12 to 15 different jobs. It's just the nature of what we do. When we deal with the performance management process and we're looking for who to hire to do a job, we are learning that the recruitment process is going to be a continual iterative process. It's one that we're going to continue to do as an employer and a manager, mainly because people don't stay at an organization like they did for some years. It's more, the word we would use is transitory. So, we've done 2 aspects already. Where are we going to go? And the second is, whom is going to help us get there? And the third is, how can we, meaning the supervisor, how can we help them achieve their goals? Very simplistic, right? Where do you want to go? Whom is going to help us get there? How do we help them achieve their goals? And that's where management comes in, and that's where the environment comes in. In reality, we've really just talked about 3 processes. Who, whom, or what, where. The second aspect is whom, and the last is who, or how. I'll say it one more time. Where are we going to go? Who is going to help us get there? And what can we do to help them get there? 3 very simple statements that really underline the performance management process. The last part is where the supervisor comes in. Well, what can I do to help my employees achieve their objectives? We have to place them in an environment that's conducive for their success. Performance appraisal process is one aspect, which I'll talk about in a couple of minutes. But we're talking about aspects like if they work in a computer, they have the best computer. They have a chair that's comfortable, an office that the temperature is satisfactory, so that they can relax and think well. Maybe we provide them some food in the morning and even maybe free lunch so that their mind is constantly energized and engaged because they're well fed. They have a solid meal plan at the workplace that doesn't have as much sugar. It doesn't have some aspects that sap away the critical mind that you need in order to be a financial analyst or some other aspect in your firm. And then you pay them well, and you put them in an environment where they enjoy coming to work. So you have a sense of management on other coworkers that you have to be nice and kind to other people. You ensure that they can focus on their primary duties and they don't have to do ancillary duties that take them away from doing their job. The more that somebody can enjoy their work, the better chance they have to do it well. It's a truism that if you enjoy doing something, you're going to want to do it more and more and more, and you want to get better at it. You're going to want to invest your time and become an expert at it. Musicians thoroughly enjoy playing music. As a result of playing music, even their downtime, or when they're away from the office, their musical office, they'll be playing music at home, and maybe even doing events or concerts for free, because it's something that they thoroughly enjoy. My son enjoys cars. My daughter shopping. Both of them, if they had any extra time, would either be working on cars or shopping. If we can have that same passion, if we as supervisors can create that same passion in the workplace by creating this environment, then it could greatly enhance an employee's ability to do their job. So that is our responsibility, the third wheel, so to speak, of the performance management process. The chart and the wheel that you see in front of you lists 5. All are good. I've summarized it into 3. But certainly you could look at these 5 arrows, and the arrows are continual. It's a continual circle, which means it's iterative. That means that there's no end to the performance management process. It's a continual process. And that's indicative, of course, of organizations that are constantly tested within the marketplace. There's always new and innovative products that may make a company's current product obsolete. So they need to continually invest in their employees in product development, in the idea generation process, so that they can compete in a marketplace that's not only encountering competition within their community, but also throughout their country, indeed throughout the world. That means that it's going to be a continual process that we have to be aware of in order to achieve our long-term objective, which is to have some permanence in the business in which we operate. We now know that if we were to stay any more longer than 10 years, that would certainly be abnormal, since the average firm is in business 10 years. But it can be done. And it requires this type of iterative process where you know where you're going, where do we want to go, you know who to hire to help you get there, and you know what you can do as a supervisor in an organization to help facilitate the performance of your employees. If you're going to spend so much money as an organization on employees, then you have to spend some money to make sure that they're meeting their objectives. That's the performance management process that we're talking about today. The last 2 slides are the last 2 arrows talk about where managers and employees evaluate results and behaviors. They look at their behavior in terms of their past, present, and future. What have they done last year? What are they doing now? What could they be doing next year if we were to work with them? All of those aspects have, as a result, the intent to create an employee who is more productive, because if they're more productive, their performance is greater. And if their performance is greater, the organization has a better chance of being profitable or more profitable. I call those the 3 Ps, and they're the, I think, natural consequence of an organization that's operating well. You want to make sure, the first P, that employees are productive. Productive means that you're creating something of value. You want to make sure that employees are as productive as possible. How do they become productive? They perform. Starts with perform. You make sure that they perform the job as expected. Doesn't mean that they can't increase their performance, but you want to make sure that they're clearly aware of the performance that's expected of them and how they should perform their job. The better we are at ensuring that our employees can perform, the more productive they're going to be. Productivity is a consequence of performance. Similarly, profitability is a consequence of productivity. The more productive you are, the more profitable you could be. Some would say, are nonprofits, is the government interested in profitability? And the answer is, of course, yes. Because unless an organization has more money at the end of the year than they spent, they're going to go out of business. Now, some governments, mainly the federal government in the United States, can borrow money. However, not many organizations have that ability to continually borrow money and not pay it back at some point. That is why, even for a nonprofit, which means they don't need to make a profit at the end of the year, they still have to generate $1 more in revenue or income than they spend in expenses. There's very few organizations, certainly none that I'm aware of, that are allowed to operate at a loss every single year. Somebody has to provide that money. It could be through fundraisers or some other types of ways they generate money, but they require more money than they spend. The American Red Cross or the Red Cross is a good example. They achieve their monies through donations. The more donations they have, the more they can prepare for disasters. Without that money, they aren't going to be able to provide the water and the food and other aspects, clothing, that a person needs when they're a victim of a natural disaster. So, profitability is important no matter what organization that you're affiliated with. So there is the performance management process. Also the 3 steps that I follow. I encourage you, as we talked about in the very first part of this process, I encourage you to create your own process. Have an understanding of the intent of the performance management process, but then create a process that works for you. I tend to not have as many bullets because people forget it. I try to use common everyday language because people will remember it. It works for me, but it may not work for you. And so the goal, the intent is to create a system that works for you, that you think will help motivate your employees to achieve their potential. And that may result in a supervisor who achieves their potential as well. If both achieve their potential, the organization has a chance of achieving their potential. And that is a positive aspect for everybody involved, because the organization may stay in business longer, which rewards everybody who's committed to that organization. That's the background, everybody. Hope you enjoy the day. Anything else that I can provide, certainly don't hesitate to let me know. Take care.